This is the final night of our program. There won't be any meditation tomorrow evening. There's no doubt that we all know of the Maharabhata, or maybe we've even read that great Indian epic contained within the Upanishads. But the final chapter of this story is appropriate for this time, after the experiences we've had being brought here to this place at this time. But first, we need to remember that the aspects of this story, as with all stories, are elements of our self. Remembering that, let's see what this great story does for us to confirm what it is that has occurred for us here. After the Great War, it was the destiny, the dharma of Yodisfa to become king. He had the qualities that befitted him to this role. He was in that state where for him all things were sentient beings, so there was no division of any kind. So the kingdom flourished. There were no further wars or conflict or conquests. All was peaceful for the many, many, many decades of his rule. But Yodisfa was tired. The wounds from the great battle bothered his physical being. He limped as he walked, and pain was part of his life. King Yodisfa ruled with his 4 brothers and his wife. And the 4 brothers were also married to this wife. So he called his brothers and his wife to him and said, "It is time. I am weary. I wish to make the journey to the horizon and the mountain that divides heaven and earth. Are you ready?" And his brothers and wife agreed that it was time. So they prepared themselves and they set out on the road towards the city gates. There were many, many who wanted to accompany their king, but he refused them. But just as they passed through the city gates, a small black puppy bounded up to them. He had white tufts of fur on his head. And King Yodisfa said to him, "Puppy, go, go. You cannot accompany us on this journey." But the puppy danced around them. And the 4 brothers and wife said, "What harm is there in this? Let him accompany us." And so it was that the small dog bounded along between them as they walked the road. After some great distance, they came to a vast ocean. And there, at the edge of the ocean, the four brothers divested themselves of their weapons, their tools, their instruments, and watched as they sunk slowly into its depths. They moved on and came to the mountain that rose up to where the clouds obliterated its peak, and began to make their way up the mountain. They rose and rose and rose, climbed and climbed, until they came to the edge of a great abyss. And at that point, the wife of Yodifa fell dead on its edge. And the four brothers, one after the other, fell in to the great chasm. Yodifa looked on with sadness. He had detached himself, he thought, from all things, but feeling and loving his brothers and his wife, a great sadness entered his being. But the little dog remained with him, licking his feet and his hands, whining a little. And then Yodifa went on and on and on, climbing and climbing, until he came to the edge of that place between the worlds, and a great darkness seemed to descend. He felt himself dissipating, disappearing, and yet there still remained the sense of loss. But the small dog remained by his side as he climbed even further. But then, suddenly, he realized that the small puppy was no longer by his side. And he thought to himself, oh, it's as well that he has gone back to his home. But then he felt a great sadness and loss. And then he had the feeling that perhaps something had happened. And whilst he tried to detach himself from that, he could not help himself but go to look for the small dog. Even with his great weariness, he made his way back down the mountain until he saw the edge of a precipice, and he heard a faint whining. And when he looked over, there was the small dog on a ledge below, crying out. Oh, King Yodifa was so weary, But how could he leave this small creature to its fate? So, with what seemed to be the last of his strength, he climbed down the steep rocks and took the puppy into his arms as it licked his face with gratefulness. And then he made his way up again to that point where the worlds meet. And just as he passed through this darkness and began to sense in ways that have not to do with the senses, he heard a sound, swishing sound. And suddenly, beside him, a great chariot appeared. And out of that chariot stepped the god Indra himself. Beside him in the chariot was Yama, the god of death. And Indra said, "You are welcome. This is the point of entry into heaven. And your life and your good works and your grace and your qualities render you worthy to enter this place." Celestial music could be heard in the distance. And King Yodifa stepped aside to allow the small dog to jump up in the chariot. Indra said, "That beast has no worthiness to enter heaven. Only those with souls may enter." King Yodifa said, "But all things have souls. How can I enter heaven and leave this creature behind?" "Ha!" said the god Indra. "Here, this great king with his good works refuses to enter heaven because his attachment to a creature." King Yodifa said, "If I have to leave this being behind, I wish to remain in the void, however long it might be." The god Indra began to laugh, and he said, "Ha! What will the other gods say when I return and tell them that the great King Yodifa could not enter heaven because of his attachment to a creature?" And the god Indra and the god Yama stepped back into the chariot, and the chariot disappeared. But when King Yodifa turned around to the small dog, there stood the great god Dhamma and said, "Come, come. I would not have expected any more nor less of you. Come, let us enter the celestial realms." "Ah," said King Yodifa, "I am so weary. I am glad to rest. And the Lord Dhamma said, yes, for but a moment, because for every beginning there is an end, and for every end there is a beginning. There is a clue to our understanding of this story. The four brothers, could it be that the four brothers are our four senses? Our taste, our hearing, our seeing. All married to the wife feeling. With this clue, what are the other elements of this story representative of for us? We can choose to read this great epic and recognize the elements and the allegory it represents. But right now, here and right now, having experienced what we've experienced, we can relate to it now. What are these aspects? What is this God, Dhamma? What was the meaning of this small dog? Who is Indra? Yama, we know. We have lived this allegory. What is its meaning for us? What remains when our senses, our feeling, are laid to rest? First of all our tools, our weapons, our instruments, cast into the ocean. What does it mean when our senses are gone, laid to rest, and we move on? There's a place between heaven and earth. Thank you, thank you.